Okay, picture this. A brand new fleet of American warships, just gleaming and powerful. But, these aren't just any ships. They're designed for spectacle, really, for a legacy that's supposed to be written in gold. This is the story of that fleet and what it tells us about a political movement that's facing a pretty big storm from within. Let's dive in.
So it all kicks off with a big announcement from President Trump. The U.S. Navy is apparently going to build two new battleships. Now, this is the first new class of battleship in decades. A really surprising move, especially when you remember that the last American battleship was taken out of service way back in the 1990s. But the biggest surprise? Oh, that was still to come. Because in an illustration that came right from the White House, the new ship has this enormous image of President Trump himself right there on the deck. I mean, talk about a personal stamp on a piece of military hardware. It immediately got people asking, wait a minute, what is the real purpose of this project? And that purpose? Well, it seems to be a lot less about naval strategy and a whole lot more about building a very public, very golden legacy. So let's get into the details of this so-called Golden Fleet. Right, so we're talking about two new Trump-class battleships. The president had apparently been complaining for years that modern warships are, and I'm quoting here, terrible looking. So he was personally involved in making sure these were more visually impressive. But as you can imagine, this focus on looks over function has military experts, well, they're deeply concerned. Yeah, the criticism from military experts was, let's say, blunt. One former rear admiral called the fleet exactly what we don't need, saying the whole project is basically just focused on the president's visual, that a battleship is a cool-looking ship. So what he's saying is, this isn't a strategic asset. It's a vanity project.
And then we get the motivation straight from the horse's mouth. According to Jesse Waters at Fox News, who was relaying a conversation he had with the president, Trump's explanation was unbelievably direct. He said, "Jesse, it's a monument. I'm building a monument to myself because no one else will." Heather Cox Richardson points to this as just a key revealing moment about the president's focus on his own legacy.
But while the administration is busy trying to build this golden facade, some really serious cracks are starting to show up everywhere else. And a major source of that pressure is the whole ongoing controversy around the Epstein files. So here's the deal. Congress passed a law, the Epstein Files Transparency Act, that required the full release of all the documents. The deadline came and went, but the Justice Department has only let go of this tiny, heavily blacked out fraction of what people think are hundreds of thousands of files. This just blatant refusal to follow the law has, of course, led to widespread accusations of a cover-up. Now, the president's reaction to all this has been, well, puzzling, even to some of his own supporters. He claimed that a lot of Republicans are very angry that this continues, kind of suggesting his base wants to shut it all down. And that just flies in the face of the loud calls for transparency that were, once a cornerstone of his support. And this really backed the administration into a corner. Former President Bill Clinton, who's been named in some of the release stuff, put out a statement basically calling their bluff. He demanded the immediate release of all files that mention him, saying he needs no such protection and kind of hinting that maybe the administration is protecting someone else. So, while the administration is dealing with all this legal pressure from the outside, the internal politics of the MAGA movement are starting to just fall apart. The whole question of who comes next isn't being whispered about anymore. It's being fought out right in the open. The first real shot was fired at the Turning Point USA conference. Eric Kirk, who is the widow of the founder Charlie Kirk, got up and publicly endorsed Vice President J.D. Vance for president in 2028. And this is all happening while President Trump himself is dropping hints about finding a way to serve a third term. So, awkward time. The infighting has gotten personal, and it's gotten very public. Ben Shapiro, a huge figure in the movement, used that very same conference stage to call fellow influencers like Candace Owens, Tucker Carlson, and Steve Bannon frauds and grifters. The key thing here is these are not small disagreements. These are full-on attacks on the character and integrity of the movement's biggest leaders. And you can see this split becoming, institutional. On one side, you've got the Heritage Foundation. Its leader is defending friendly interviews with the far right, and it's causing a bunch of staff to just leave. And on the other side, a lot of those same people are running over to former Vice President Mike Pence's foundation, which is explicitly rejecting the core ideas of Trumpism, things like trade walls and isolationism. So when you put it all together, it really paints a picture of just widespread chaos. You've got Ted Cruz reportedly bad-mouthing J.D. Vance behind the scenes. You have state-level Republicans in Indiana openly defying the president's demands. And the movement's biggest names and think tanks are basically at war with each other. It's a mess.
Now, if you want a perfect example of this feeling of losing control, look no further than what just happened with one of the most respected shows in journalism, 60 Minutes. An attempt to control the story there backfired in, well, the most spectacular way possible.
Okay, let's just walk through this because it's wild. 60 Minutes does a story about the administration sending migrants to this notorious terrorist prison in El Salvador. It's all vetted, fact-checked, legally cleared, good to go. But then, just hours before it's supposed to air, the new editor-in-chief, who was put in place by a Trump loyalist, kills the story. What they didn't count on, though, was that the segment had already been sent to their partners in Canada. So it leaks online in the US, and because of the drama, it goes viral.
The correspondent on the story, Sharon Alfonsi, explained the whole principle perfectly in an email to her colleagues. She argued that if the government can kill any story just by refusing to comment, it basically gives them a kill switch on any reporting they don't like. And that, of course, is a fundamental threat to a free press.
So what does all this add up to? You've got a golden fleet on one hand and just chaos on the other. And this isn't just a vibe or a feeling anymore. It's actually starting to show up in the data and in expert analysis. Let's just look at the numbers for a second. A new YouGov poll shows that fewer than half of Republicans now say they strongly approve of the president. And when you look at a huge issue like inflation, that number drops to just 1/3. This is a real, quantifiable weakening of that once rock-solid support. Analyst Josh Marshall from Talking Points memo in a piece that Heather Cox Richardson referenced, he just synthesizes this perfectly. He describes the political world around Trump right now as having a feeling of drift, spectacle, and fragmentation. It's a portrait of a movement led by a man who, in Marshall's words, seems bored, tapped out, losing coherence and energy. And all of this, the monument building, the internal power struggles, these clumsy attempts to control the story, it all leads to one central, really unavoidable question. It's a question not just for this movement, but for the whole country. When everything is built on the personality and image of one person, what's left when the cracks start to show? Or when they're not there at all?